Welcome to Marple Whispers. I'm Sean. Tell me, where are you listening from right now? And what time is it there? I'd love to know. Share it in the comments along with how you liked the story. I reply to every single one of you. Now let's step into the mystery. In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a chilling mystery unfolds. A man lies dead in a muddy lane. His shoes vanished, his secrets buried with him. Enter Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming spinster with a razor-sharp mind, unravelling a web of stolen jewels, forged documents, and deadly betrayal. From cryptic telegrams to a rouge-stained cigarette stub, every clue points to a killer hiding in plain sight. Will Marple's quiet wisdom expose the truth before the village's shadows strike again? Dive into the murder of the man with no shoes, a gripping Agatha Christie-style whodunit where nothing is as it seems. Chapter 1. The Discovery in the Lane. The mist clung to the hedgerows of St. Mary Mead like a secretive veil, muting the golden hues of autumn leaves underfoot. It was one of those mornings when the world seemed hushed, as if holding its breath for some impending revelation. Young Dolly Bantry, with her terrier Kip scampering ahead on his lead, had set out for her customary stroll along the winding lane behind the vicarage. The air was sharp with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke from distant chimneys, and Dolly hummed a tune from the wireless to ward off the chill. Kip's sudden bark shattered the tranquility. The little dog strained at his leash, nose quivering toward a crumpled shape half hidden in the ditch. Dolly's heart skipped as she approached, her boots sinking into the soft mud. There, sprawled face down amid the bracken, was a man, or what remained of one. His overcoat, sodden from the overnight drizzle, twisted awkwardly around his limbs, and his hands clutched at the earth as if in a final, futile grasp. But it was his feet that seized her attention. Bare of shoes, only thin woolen socks caked in grime, toes curled in eternal protest against the cold ground. A gasp escaped her lips, followed by a piercing scream that echoed through the village. Kip yipped in frenzy, and within moments the vicar, Reverend Clement, emerged from his garden gate, his cassock flapping like a startled crow. "Good heavens, Miss Bantry! What on earth—" He knelt beside the body, his face paling as he checked for a pulse. None. The man's neck bore faint bruises, shadows of violence in the pale dawn light. Word spread like wildfire through St. Mary Mead's tidy cottages and manicured gardens. By the time Constable Polk arrived on his bicycle, a small crowd had gathered. Mrs. Price Ridley peering over her spectacles, the postman lingering with his sack, and even the milkman pausing his rounds. Polk cordoned off the lane with makeshift tape, his voice authoritative yet trembling. "Stand back, all of you. This is police business now." The victim was soon identified by a Eshib-Tajuchu engraved pocket watch tucked in his waistcoat. Reginald Thorpe, a middle-aged antiques dealer from Much Benham, known for his sharp eye and sharper tongue. He'd been in the area for a week, lodging at the Blue Boar Inn, rumoured to be evaluating rarities for the local gentry. No wallet, no papers, just that watch and a silk handkerchief monogrammed with swirling initials. And those missing shoes vanished as if swallowed by the mist itself. News of the grisly find reached Miss Jane Marple by mid-morning, carried on the wings of village chatter. She was in her sunlit drawing room, her frail hands deftly manoeuvring knitting needles through a web of soft wool, when her nephew, Raymond West, burst in from London, his city Polish contrasting with the room's chintz and lace. "Aunt Jane, have you heard? A murder, right here in your Sleepy Hollow. A chap found dead in the lane, shoeless as a beggar. Miss Marple set down her needles, her blue eyes twinkling with that peculiar sharpness that belied her age. Shoeless, you say? How extraordinarily suggestive! One doesn't part with one's shoes lightly, Raymond, not in October's bite. It speaks of haste, or perhaps coercion. Do tell me more. Raymond paced the room, recounting the details with dramatic flair, the body's position, the lack of struggle marks beyond those bruises, the absence of any weapon. Inspector Craddock from the county force had arrived by then, his trench coat flapping as he surveyed the scene. "Robbery, plain as day," Craddock declared to Pork, his voice carrying to the onlookers. Bloke was waylaid, strangled for his valuables, shoes probably nicked for resale. Desperate times, you know. But Miss Marple, overhearing the exchange later from her vantage at the garden fence, where she pretended to prune roses, allowed herself a quiet test. Robbers in St. Mary Mead? Unlikely, and certainly not ones fixated on footwear when a fine watch gleamed untouched. No, this was something deeper, a puzzle woven from the threads of human folly. She thought of old Mr. Hargreaves from her girlhood days, who had hidden a fortune in his boot heels, only to meet a sticky end when the secret leaked. "People are so careless with their secrets," she murmured to herself, clipping a wilted bloom. "And secrets, my dear, have a habit of leaving footprints, even when the shoes are gone." As the day wore on, the lane buzzed with speculation. Was Thorpe a victim of chance, or had he trodden on toes best left alone? Miss Marple retired to her armchair, her mind already piecing together the fragments. In the quiet of her cottage, amid the ticking clock and the faint aroma of lavender, the first threads of the mystery began to unravel in her thoughts, promising a tangle as intricate as any she'd unravelled before. Chapter 2. The Suspects Emerge. The autumn sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the cobbled high street as the village buzzed with the electric hum of speculation. The murder of Reginald Thorpe had ignited a fire of curiosity, and every tea shop and garden gate crackled with theories. By noon, the Blue Boar Inn, where Thorpe had spent his final days, had become the epicenter of whispers, its oak-beamed taproom crowded with villagers eager for details. Miss Jane Marple, however, preferred the quiet of Mrs. Clement's vicarage parlour, where a pot of Darjeeling and a plate of scones provided the perfect backdrop for observation. Her knitting needles clicked in a steady rhythm, a metronome to her thoughts, as she listened to the ebb and flow of village gossip. Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, poured tea with a trembling hand, her eyes wide with the thrill of scandal. "They say he was a shady sort, that Mr. Thorpe," she confided, glancing toward the door as if expecting the man's ghost to appear. "Always skulking about, asking questions about old families and their heirlooms. Why, Mrs. Price Ridley swears she saw him near the old mill 2 nights ago, whispering with a woman in a red coat." Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial hush, as if the walls themselves might betray her. Miss Marple raised an eyebrow, her delicate fingers pausing mid-stitch. "A red coat, you say? How very distinctive." She filed the detail away, her mind drifting to a long-ago incident involving a stolen shawl and a case of mistaken identity in Chipping Cleghorn. People, she reflected, were so quick to see what they expected, and Mrs. Price Ridley was nothing if not imaginative. The parlour door swung open, admitting Inspector Craddock, his face etched with the weariness of a man wrestling with too few facts. He accepted a cup of tea with a nod, settling into a chintz-covered chair. "We've been digging into Thorpe's affairs," He began addressing the small gathering, Miss Marple, Mrs. Clement, and Raymond West, who had lingered in the village sensing a story for his next novel. He wasn't just an antique stealer. Seems he had a knack for turning up at country houses with valuable collections, offering appraisals that didn't always add up. Sir Henry Clithering up at the hall says Thorpe undervalued his silver, called him a charlatan to his face. Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. Sir Henry, with his blustering pride and penchant for rare port, was not a man to take kindly to being swindled. And did Sir Henry seem unduly upset? She inquired, her tone as mild as the tea she sipped. Craddock hesitated, sensing the weight behind her question. He was red in the face when we spoke, but he claims he sent Thorpe packing after a row. No violence, he says. Still, we're checking his alibi. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Then there's the innkeeper, Mr. Pettigrew. He overheard Thorpe arguing with someone in the tap-room the night before last. Something about a cursed artifact and a deal gone sour. Couldn't see the other fellow, though. Too dark, he says. A cursed artifact, Raymond interjected, his writer's imagination alight. Sounds like something out of a Gothic novel. Perhaps Thorpe was mixed up in smuggling. Stolen relics, maybe. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. Or perhaps, she said softly, it was less exotic. People often cloak their greed in dramatic terms. I once knew a grocer in St. Mary Mead who spoke of a cursed debt when he simply owed money to a bookmaker. Her eyes twinkled, but her mind was elsewhere, sifting through the possibilities. An argument, a mysterious figure, and missing shoes, each detail a thread in a tapestry she was only beginning to discern. The conversation turned to Lydia Finch, the barmaid at the Blue Boar, whose name had surfaced in hushed tones. A pretty girl with auburn curls and a nervous smile, Lydia had served Thorpe his nightly whiskey, and more than one villager had noticed his lingering glances. She's a good girl, Mrs. Clement insisted, but Thorpe was too forward. Asked her personal questions about her family, her brother in London. Made her uneasy, poor thing. Craddock nodded. We spoke to her. She admits Thorpe was charming but pushy. Said he promised her a better life if she'd trust him. Sounds like he was spinning tales to win her over, but she swears she kept her distance. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression serene but her thoughts sharp. Young girls, she knew, could be swayed by charm, but they could also sense danger. Lydia's unease suggested Thorpe had overstepped, perhaps revealing more than he intended. And this brother in London, she asked, is he known to the police? Craddock's jaw tightened. Tommy Finch, a petty thief with a record for fencing stolen goods. We're bringing him in for questioning. If Thorpe was moving stolen antiques, Tommy might have been his contact. The parlour grew quiet, save for the crackle of the fire and the soft clink of teacups. Miss Marple's mind wandered to a case from her youth, when a village girl's suitor had hidden stolen silver in a hayloft, only to be betrayed by his own boasts. Men like Thorpe, she mused, often underestimated the observant nature of small communities. St. Mary Mead, for all its sleepy charm, had eyes in every window. As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple excused herself, claiming a need to tend her roses. In truth, she wanted a closer look at the Blue Boar. Bundled in her tweed coat, she ambled down the high street, her walking stick tapping a thoughtful rhythm. The inn was a sturdy, half-timbered building, its windows glowing with lamplight. Inside, Mr. Pettigrew polished glasses behind the bar, his face a mask of practiced neutrality. Miss Marple ordered a small sherry, settling into a corner where she could observe unnoticed. Lydia moved among the tables, her smile strained. A group of regulars, farmers and shopkeepers, muttered about Thorpe's death, their voices thick with suspicion. Heard he was flashing money about, one said. Not the honest sort, if you ask me. Another mentioned the woman in the red coat, though no one could agree on her identity. Miss Marple sipped her sherry, noting the way Pettigrew's eyes darted toward Lydia whenever Thorpe's name was mentioned. Was it concern for his employee, or something more? As she left the inn, Miss Marple paused by the lane where Thorpe had been found. The mud had been trampled by curious feet, but she studied the hedgerows, her gaze catching on a glint of metal, a tiny button caught in the brambles. It was cheap, mass-produced, unlike the fine tailoring of Thorpe's coat. Curious, she murmured, tucking it into her handbag. It reminded her of a case in Market Basing, where a single cufflink had pointed to a killer's haste. Back at her cottage, she sat by the fire, her knitting untouched as she pondered. Thorpe's death was no random act of violence. The missing shoes, the overheard argument, the red coat that might not exist, each was a piece of a puzzle, and Miss Marple knew puzzles. People are so careless, she said to her cat, Tuppence, who blinked from the hearthrug. They leave clues everywhere, if only one knows where to look. The village clock chimed, and Miss Marple smiled. The game, as Sherlock Holmes might have said, was afoot. Chapter 3. The Clue of the Muddy Path. The drizzle had ceased by the following morning, leaving St. Mary Mead's lane slick with mud and secrets. The narrow path behind the vicarage, where Reginald Thorpe's body had been found, was now a shrine to village curiosity, its edges trampled by the boots of onlookers. Yet to Miss Jane Marple, who stood at the lane's entrance with her sturdy umbrella and a thoughtful frown, it was less a spectacle than a canvas, painted with clues for those with eyes to see. The air carried the sharp tang of wet leaves, and a thrush's song pierced the stillness, as if mocking the gravity of the scene. Inspector Craddock was already there, his trench coat spattered with mud as he crouched beside Constable Pork. The two men studied the ground, where Thorpe's stockinged footprints mingled with others, some deep and booted, others smudged by the rain. He was running, no doubt about it, Craddock said, pointing to the uneven impressions leading from the vicarage toward the railway station. But look here, a single heavy boot print, larger than Thorpe's size, heading toward the vicarage garden. Odd, don't you think? Polk scratched his chin. Killer chased him, maybe. Took the shoes as some sort of trophy. His tone betrayed his skepticism. Even a village constable knew robbers in St. Mary Mead were more likely to pilfer apples than footwear. Miss Marple, approaching with her nephew Raymond in tow, overheard the exchange. "A trophy, you say?" she remarked, her voice as gentle as the breeze. "How curious. In my experience, Inspector, trophies are taken to boast, yet this killer seems to have preferred secrecy." Her eyes, bright behind her spectacles, scanned the path. She recalled a case in her youth involving a stolen locket, where the thief's haste had left a trail as clear as day. "Might I take a closer look?" she asked, leaning on her stick. Craddock, accustomed to her unerring knack for noticing what others missed, nodded. Miss Marple stepped carefully along the path, her sensible shoes avoiding the worst of the mud. The hedgerows were dense with brambles, their thorns snagging at her coat. Near where Thorpe's body had lain, She paused, her gaze catching on a shred of fabric clinging to a thorn. A coarse tweed, matching the dealer's overcoat. "He was in a hurry," she murmured to Raymond, who hovered like an eager pupil, running from something or someone. Further along, she spotted a faint smear of chalky soil, out of place amid the dark loam. It led toward a stile that connected the lane to the vicarage garden. Chalk, she noted, from the old quarry path, perhaps. Someone came this way, and not by accident. Raymond, scribbling in his notebook, raised an eyebrow. "You think the killer doubled back to the vicarage? That's bold." "Not bold, my dear," Miss Marple corrected, "but desperate. Desperation makes one careless." She thought of Mrs. Eldridge, a vicar's wife long ago, who had hidden a lover's letters in a garden shed, only to be undone by a muddy footprint. Human nature, she reflected, was a predictable beast. Back at the vicarage, Craddock shared the post-mortem findings over a cup of Mrs. Clement's strong tea. Thorpe had died of strangulation, his windpipe crushed by a cord or scarf, but traces of chloroform lingered on his monogrammed handkerchief. "Drugged first, then killed," Craddock said, his brow furrowed. "No signs of a struggle beyond those bruises. And here's the kicker, no robbery. His watch, a fine gold piece, was still on him. So why the shoes?" Miss Marple's needles, retrieved from her bag, began their familiar dance. "Perhaps," she suggested, "the shoes were not taken for their value, but for what they contained." Her mind flickered to a village tailor who had once sewn banknotes into a hem to evade a creditor. "People hide things in the strangest places, Inspector. Shoes are intimate, easily overlooked." Craddock frowned, unconvinced. "Possible, but we've searched the lane and the churchyard. No sign of them. If the killer took them, they're well hidden." He glanced at Raymond, who was sketching a map of the lane in his notebook. "Any theories, Mr. West?" Raymond grinned. "I'd say it's like one of Aunt Jane's stories. A smuggling ring, perhaps, with secrets tucked in the soles." Thorpe double-crossed his partners, and they silenced him. His tone was half-joking, but Miss Marple's lips twitched. Her nephew's imagination, while florid, occasionally brushed against truth. The conversation turned to the village's latest rumours. Mrs. Price Ridley, ever the font of hearsay, had doubled down on her tale of the woman in the red coat, claiming she'd seen her near the mill with Thorpe under the moonlight. A scarlet woman, no doubt. She'd huffed at the post office, delighting in her own drama. But Mr. Pettigrew, the innkeeper, offered a different tidbit when Craddock pressed him. "Thorpe was jumpy that last night," he said. "Kept looking over his shoulder, muttering about someone watching him. Paid his bill in cash, too. Crisp notes, more than I'd expect from a man in his trade." Miss Marple, listening quietly, sipped her tea. Jumpy men, she knew, often had reason to fear. She recalled a nervous curate who had fled St. Mary Mead after pilfering the collection plate, his guilt betrayed by his restless glances. "Did Mr. Pettigrew mention anyone else in the tap-room that night?" she asked. Craddock nodded. "Just the usual crowd. Farmers, the blacksmith, and young Dr. Haydock, who'd stopped in for a pint. He said Thorpe seemed agitated, kept checking his watch. Haydock prescribed him sedatives a few days prior for insomnia." "Insomnia?" Miss Marple repeated, her voice soft but her mind racing. Sleeplessness often stemmed from a troubled conscience, or a fear of discovery. She made a mental note to speak with Dr. Haydock, whose youthful charm masked a sharpness she found intriguing. As the afternoon faded, Miss Marple took a solitary walk along the lane, her umbrella tapping the ground like a metronome. The muddy path told its story in fragments. Thorpe's frantic footprints, the larger boot print veering toward the vicarage, the chalky smear hinting at a second route. At the stile, she found another clue, a broken twig, snapped as if someone had climbed in haste. "Careless," she whispered, her eyes scanning the vicarage garden beyond. A glint caught her attention, a shard of glass, half buried in the soil, possibly from a bottle. She left it undisturbed, knowing Craddock's men would need to see it. Returning home, she settled by her fire, Tuppence the cat purring at her feet. The clues were mounting, the fabric, the chalk, the glass, the missing shoes, but they formed no clear picture yet. "It's like a jigsaw puzzle," she told Tuppence, with half the pieces turned upside down. Yet she felt a thrill, the quiet excitement of a huntress stalking not game, but truth. Thorpe's death was no random act. It was a performance, staged by someone who thought themselves clever. But Miss Marple, with her unassuming air and village wisdom, knew cleverness often tripped over its own pride. The muddy path had spoken, and she was listening. Chapter 4. Secrets in the Attic. The morning sun struggled through a veil of clouds over St. Mary Mead, casting a pallid light on the Blue Boar Inn, where Reginald Thorpe's brief stay had left a trail of whispers and suspicion. The village, usually content with petty squabbles over garden fences, now thrummed with the intrigue of murder. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her breakfast table with a cup of Earl Grey and a slice of toast, listened as her maid, Cherry, relayed the latest gossip. "They're saying at the post office that Thorpe was no antiques dealer at all," Cherry said, her eyes wide. "Some reckon he was a spy carrying secrets in those missing shoes." Miss Marple smiled faintly, buttering her toast with precision. "Spies, Cherry? How very melodramatic! Though I dare say people love a tale that sparkles." Her mind, however, was far from idle, turning over the fragments of the case like pieces of a quilt. The shoes, the chloroform, the overheard argument about a cursed artifact, each was a stitch in a pattern she was determined to unravel. She recalled a long-ago incident involving a smuggler's trunk in St. Mary Mead, where hidden compartments had held more than mere trinkets. By midday, Inspector Craddock had summoned his team to the Blue Boar to search Thorpe's room, a cramped attic space under the inn's sloping eaves. Miss Marple, invited by Craddock to offer her village insights, climbed the narrow stairs with surprising agility, her walking stick tapping a steady rhythm. The room was sparse. A sagging bed, a chipped washstand, and a locked valise that had resisted Polk's initial efforts. With a crowbar's persuasion, the valise yielded its secrets. A collection of antique jewellery, glittering with garnets and pearls, none of which matched Sir Henry Clithering's silver heirlooms. Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Stolen, I'll wager. We've had reports of a theft at a London auction house last month. Items like these. Thorpe was no dealer. He was a fence." He turned to Mr. Pettigrew, who hovered nervously in the doorway. "Did you know about this?" Pettigrew mopped his brow with a handkerchief. "Not a clue, Inspector. He paid his bill, kept to himself, though he did get a telegram the day before he died. I saw it on the counter. Something about shoes know all. Thought it odd, but he snatched it up quick." Miss Marple's needles, tucked in her bag, seemed to itch for action. "A telegram," she mused, her voice soft as the creak of the floorboards. "How precise, and so suggestive." She thought of a village postmistress who had once intercepted a coded message, revealing a blackmail scheme. Words, she knew, could be as dangerous as any weapon. Downstairs, the taproom buzzed with locals, their voices low but eager. Lydia Finch, wiping tables with a distracted air, flinched when Craddock questioned her about Thorpe's attentions. "He was kind at first," she admitted, her cheeks flushing. "Talked of taking me to London, said he'd make me a lady. But he got insistent. Asked about my brother Tommy, what he did in the city. I didn't like it." Craddock's interest sharpened. Tommy Finch, Lydia's brother, was known to the police. A small-time crook with a penchant for fencing stolen goods. If Thorpe was moving stolen jewellery, Craddock said to Miss Marple later, over tea at the vicarage, Tommy could be his link to the London underworld. "We're bringing him in tomorrow." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression serene, but her mind racing. "Perhaps," she said, "but connections are not always conspiracies. Young men like Tommy are often pawns, not players." She recalled a case in Loomuth, where a brash youth had been manipulated by a cunning employer. "The jewellery is telling, Inspector, but the shoes, they're the key. Why take them, unless they held something more valuable than gold?" The village, meanwhile, spun its own theories. Mrs. Price Ridley, holding court at the Women's Institute, insisted the woman in the red coat was a femme fatale, luring Thorpe to his doom. "I saw her myself," she declared, "slipping through the mill gate like a shadow." But when pressed, her description faltered. Tall or short, young or old, no one could say. Miss Marple, hearing this through Cherry, chuckled softly. Mrs. Price Ridley does love her dramas, but shadows are often just that, shadows. A new lead emerged that afternoon, when Dr. Haydock, the village physician, called at the vicarage to discuss a charity fete. His boyish charm was tempered by a nervous edge, as he spoke of Thorpe. "He came to me complaining of sleeplessness," Haydock said, stirring his tea. "Seemed haunted, always checking the windows. I gave him sedatives, nothing strong, mind you, but he mentioned something odd, about a deal that could ruin him." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Ruin, you say? That's a heavy word." She thought of a curate's wife who had once spoken of ruin, only to be hiding her husband's gambling debts. Did he say who might ruin him? Haydock shook his head. "No, but he was sweating, even in the cool of my surgery. I thought it was just nerves. Antiques dealers lead high-stakes lives, don't they?" He laughed, but it rang hollow. As evening fell, Miss Marple took a turn through the churchyard, her scarf wrapped tight against the chill. The vicarage garden bordered the lane, and she paused where the stile met the path. The chalky smear she'd noticed yesterday was gone, washed away by rain, but her memory held it fast. Near the church gate, she spotted something new. A cigarette stub, its tip stained with a faint trace of rouge. "Curious," she murmured, slipping it into her handkerchief. Lipstick was rare in St. Mary Mead, but not unknown. Was the red coat real, after all, or a convenient fiction? Back at her cottage, she sat by the fire, her cat Tuppence curled at her feet. The valise, the telegram, the cigarette stub, each was a note in a discordant symphony. She closed her eyes, picturing Thorpe's attic room, its low ceiling. Pressing down like a guilty conscience. He was hiding something, she told Tuppence, and someone knew it. The shoes were no trophy. They were evidence. Her mind drifted to a village seamstress who had once concealed a stolen brooch in a slipper's lining, betrayed by a single loose thread. The village clock struck 9, its chimes echoing through the quiet. Miss Marple's knitting lay untouched, her thoughts weaving a net around the suspects. Pettigrew, with his sharp ears. Lydia, caught in Thorpe's charm. Tommy, the likely crook. Haydock, with his sedatives and secrets. And Sir Henry, whose bluster hid a shadowed past. The telegram's words, "Shoes know all," rang in her mind like a warning bell. Someone had known Thorpe's game, and they had played their own, with deadly precision. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple felt the familiar thrill of the chase. The attic had yielded its secrets, but the lane, the shoes, and the truth were still out there, waiting for her to find them. Chapter 5. The Red Herring Unravels. The late October dusk settled over St. Mary Mead like a velvet curtain, softening the edges of the village's thatched roofs and stone walls. A faint chill hung in the air, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. In Miss Jane Marple's cottage, the fire cast a warm glow across her chintz armchairs, where she sat with her knitting, though her needles lay idle. The village was abuzz with the arrest of Tommy Finch, Lydia's brother, apprehended that morning at the railway station with a stolen garnet brooch in his pocket. Inspector Craddock, triumphant, had declared the case all but solved. Caught red-handed, he'd told the vicar, his voice ringing with certainty. Thorpe's accomplice, no doubt, turned on him when the deal soured. But Miss Marple, stirring her tea with a delicate silver spoon, was not so easily convinced. "Too tidy, my dear Inspector," she said softly, when Craddock stopped by to share the news. "Murder is seldom so obliging as to wrap itself up in a neat parcel. I'm reminded of a case in Radford, where a poacher's arrest seemed to close a theft, only for the true culprit, a respectable widow, to slip away unnoticed." Her eyes twinkled with the quiet mischief of one who knew human nature's knack for deception. Craddock, perched on the edge of her sofa, frowned. "You think Tommy's a red herring? The brooch matches the haul from Thorpe's valise. He's got a record, and he was in the village the night of the murder." "Indeed," Miss Marple replied, her tone as gentle as the firelight. "But consider the shoes, Inspector. A thief like Tommy might take a wallet or a watch, but why bother with muddy footwear? There's a deeper game here, one that requires patience to unravel." She thought of a village baker who had once hidden stolen coins in a loaf, only to be betrayed by a crumbly crust. The obvious, she knew, was often a distraction. Determined to test her instincts, Miss Marple requested a private word with Lydia Finch. The barmaid, summoned to the vicarage under the guise of helping with fete preparations, arrived with eyes red from crying. Over a cup of Mrs. Clement's strong tea, Lydia poured out her story. "Tommy's no saint," she admitted, twisting a handkerchief in her hands, "but he didn't kill anyone. Mr. Thorpe was persuasive, promised me a new life, said he'd take me to London, show me the world, but when I pressed him, he laughed, said I was too simple for his plans." Her voice broke. "I felt a fool, Miss Marple. He was no gentleman." Miss Marple patted her hand, her expression one of grandmotherly sympathy. "My dear, men like Thorpe often prey on hope. But tell me, did he ever mention anything specific about his business or those shoes?" Lydia shook her head, but a flicker of memory crossed her face. "Once he said something odd, about keeping his secrets close to the ground. I thought he was joking." The phrase lingered in Miss Marple's mind like a half-remembered tune. Secrets close to the ground? Could it mean the shoes themselves? She recalled a seamstress in St. Mary Mead who had hidden love letters in a boot's lining, discovered only when the heel wore through. "Thank you, Lydia," she said, her voice warm but her thoughts racing. The girl's honesty was a thread, but not the whole tapestry. Meanwhile, the village churned with fresh rumours. Mrs. Price Ridley's tale of the woman in the red coat had grown legs, with some claiming she was a jilted lover, others a spy from London. But when Craddock pressed her for details, her story crumbled like dry scones. "Well, it was dark," she huffed, "but I'm certain I saw a flash of red near the mill." Miss Marple, hearing this through Cherry's gossip, smiled to herself. Mrs. Price Ridley's imagination was a fountain, but fountains rarely ran clear. Craddock's investigation turned next to Sir Henry Clithering, who invited the inspector and Miss Marple to the hall for sherry. The squire, his face ruddy from more than the fire, admitted to a heated exchange with Thorpe. "He tried to blackmail me," Sir Henry confessed, swirling his glass. "Knew about an old indiscretion, a dalliance years ago, before my marriage. Wanted a cut of my estate's profits to keep quiet. I paid him a sum to shut him up, but I swear I didn't touch him." His bluster rang with sincerity, but Miss Marple noted the tremor in his hand. Guilt, she knew, wore many masks. Dr. Haydock, too, faced scrutiny. At the Blue Boar, where Miss Marple stopped for a glass of ginger wine, the young doctor was nursing a pint, his usual charm dimmed. "Thorpe was a wreck," he told Craddock, who joined them. "Came to me for stronger sedatives. Said he was being watched. I refused anything beyond the usual dose. Ethics, you know. But he hinted at trouble, said he'd crossed someone. Dangerous." Haydock's eyes darted to the door, as if expecting that danger to walk in. Miss Marple sipped her wine, her mind sifting through the doctor's words. A dangerous crossing suggested more than a simple theft. She thought of a village chemist who had once mixed poison for a desperate client, undone by his own meticulous records. "Did Mr. Thorpe mention who he feared?" she asked, her tone as casual as a Sunday chat. Haydock shook his head. "No names. Just said he'd made a bad bargain and needed to get out of St. Mary Mead fast." His voice was steady, but Miss Marple noted the way his fingers tightened around his glass. Fear, or something else. As night fell, Miss Marple took a final turn through the churchyard, her scarf warding off the evening's bite. The cigarette stub with its rouge-stained tip, found the previous day, weighed heavily in her thoughts. She paused by the church gate, where the vicar had reported a prowler the night before, a shadow flitting among the graves. "Someone's watching," she murmured, her eyes scanning the darkened path. The lane, the shoes, the telegram, all pointed to a secret Thorpe had carried, one worth killing for. Back at her cottage, she settled by the fire, Tuppence purring softly. The brooch in Tommy's pocket was a distraction, she decided, like a shiny lure in a fisherman's tackle. The true killer had orchestrated this arrest, perhaps planting the jewel to divert suspicion. Clever, she told Tuppence, but not clever enough. Her mind turned to the chloroform on Thorpe's handkerchief, the large boot print veering toward the vicarage, the cryptic telegram. Each was a note in a melody of deceit, and Miss Marple was determined to hear the full tune. The village clock chimed 10, its solemn toll a reminder of time's relentless march. Miss Marple picked up her knitting, her needles clicking like a metronome. Tommy Finch might be a thief, but a murderer? She doubted it. The red herring was unravelling, and with it, the killer's confidence. Somewhere in St. Mary Mead, someone was growing nervous, and Miss Marple, with her quiet wisdom and village-sharp eyes, was closing in. Chapter 6. The Gathering Storm. A storm brewed over St. Mary Mead, its heavy clouds piling high above the village, as if nature itself sensed the tension coiling beneath the thatched roofs and tidy gardens. The air was thick with the promise of rain, and the wind carried a restless energy that mirrored the unease gripping the villagers. Miss Jane Marple, ensconced in her cottage with a shawl draped over her shoulders, watched the sky darken through her lace-curtained window. Her knitting lay untouched, for her mind was too busy weaving the threads of Reginald Thorpe's murder into a coherent pattern. The shoes, the chloroform, the stolen jewellery, the cryptic telegram, each was a clue, but the picture they formed remained tantalizingly incomplete. The village, meanwhile, buzzed with fresh developments. Tommy Finch's arrest had stirred a hornet's nest of gossip, with some declaring him a cold-blooded killer, and others insisting he was merely a scapegoat. Mrs. Price Ridley, ever the harbinger of drama, had taken to warning her neighbours of prowlers, claiming she'd seen a figure skulking near the mill the previous night. "It's that woman in the red coat, mark my words," she proclaimed at the butcher's, her voice shrill with conviction. Miss Marple, hearing this through Cherry's morning report, shook her head. "Mrs. Price Ridley does love her spectres," she murmured to Tuppence, her cat, who blinked lazily from the hearthrug. "But spectres leave no footprints." Determined to test the waters, Miss Marple invited a small gathering to her cottage under the pretext of discussing the upcoming village fete. Inspector Craddock arrived first, his face lined with the strain of a case that refused to resolve neatly. Sir Henry Clithering followed, his bluster subdued by the weight of his blackmail confession. Dr. Haydock, summoned from his surgery, entered with a forced smile, his eyes darting to the corners of the room. Lydia Finch, reluctant but persuaded by Mrs. Clement's gentle insistence, sat twisting her apron, while Mr. Pettigrew, the innkeeper, hovered near the door, polishing his spectacles with nervous energy. Raymond West, sensing a climax worthy of his novels, perched on a stool, notebook in hand. Miss Marple poured tea with the grace of a seasoned hostess, her voice light as she steered the conversation toward the fete. "We must decide on the cake stall," she said, passing a plate of shortbread. "But I confess my thoughts keep straying to poor Mr. Thorpe. Those missing shoes, so peculiar, don't you think?" Her eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, flickered across her guests, noting their reactions. Pettigrew cleared his throat. "Odd indeed, Miss Marple. I noticed Thorpe was particular about his boots. Polished them every evening like a ritual. Kept them by his bed, not in the hall like most guests." His words hung in the air, and Miss Marple's mind flashed to a village cobbler who had once hidden a stolen watch in a boot's sole, discovered only when the leather split. "Polished them himself?" she asked, her tone innocent. "How diligent! Most men rely on inn staff for such tasks." Pettigrew flushed, mumbling something about Thorpe's fussiness. Lydia, meanwhile, stared into her teacup, her fingers trembling. Sir Henry coughed, his face reddening, while Haydock stirred his tea with undue focus. Craddock, sensing the shift, leaned forward. "Anything else you noticed, Mr. Pettigrew? About that telegram, perhaps?" The innkeeper hesitated. "Just what I told you, Inspector. Shoes know all," it said. I thought it was a jest, but Thorpe looked shaken when he read it. Miss Marple's needles, retrieved from her bag, began their quiet dance. A telegram, she mused, was a deliberate act. Someone wanted Thorpe to know they knew his secret. She recalled a case in Market Basing, where a coded note had sparked a betrayal, unravelling a web of greed. The conversation faltered as thunder rumbled outside, a low growl that seemed to underscore the room's tension. Then came a breakthrough, delivered by the vicar, who burst in with a flushed face, his cassock damp from the first drops of rain. Miss Marple, Inspector, I found something in the churchyard. He produced a pair of worn leather shoes, their laces frayed but intact, stuffed with a roll of microfilm. Hidden under a yew tree behind a gravestone, he panted. I was checking the grounds after that prowler report. Craddock examined the microfilm, his brow furrowing. Not espionage, I hope, he muttered, but a quick inspection under Miss Marple's magnifying glass revealed forged provenance documents for the stolen jewellery in Thorpe's valise. So he was a forger, Craddock said, his voice grim, selling fakes as genuine antiques with paperwork to match. That's what got him killed. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Indeed, Inspector. And the shoes were the vault for his deception. But why hide them in the churchyard? The killer took them, found the microfilm, and then she paused, her mind racing. They were interrupted, perhaps by Dolly Bantry's approach that morning, so they stashed the shoes in haste. She thought of a village poacher who had hidden stolen game in a hollow tree, only to be caught when a dog sniffed it out. The room grew silent, save for the patter of rain against the windows. Sir Henry shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confession of blackmail hanging like a shadow. Haydock's fingers tightened around his cup, and Lydia's eyes darted to the door. Pettigrew polished his spectacles again, a tick that Miss Marple noted with interest. Someone here, she sensed, knew more than they let on. As the storm broke, lightning illuminating the cottage's cosy interior, Miss Marple steered the conversation back to the fete, her questions probing like a surgeon's scalpel. Dr. Haydock, you must see many anxious souls in your surgery, she said. Did Mr. Thorpe ever mention a fear of betrayal? Haydock's smile was tight. Only in passing, Miss Marple. Said he'd trusted the wrong person once. I thought it was the sedatives talking. She nodded, her mind cataloguing his unease. Betrayal, she knew, was a motive as old as time. She recalled a governess in St. Mary Mead who had betrayed her employer's trust, her guilt revealed by a nervous habit of twisting her rings. And you, Sir Henry, she continued, you mentioned paying Thorpe to keep silent. Did he ever hint at what else he knew? Sir Henry's face darkened. He was vague, said he had papers that could ruin reputations. I thought he meant my old affair, but now... His voice trailed off, and Miss Marple's needles paused. Papers, hidden in shoes, forged to deceive. Thorpe had been playing a dangerous game. As the guests departed into the storm, Miss Marple sat by the fire, tuppence purring at her feet. The microfilm was a revelation, but the killer's identity remained elusive. The shoes had been found, but the hands that hid them were still at large. Someone was watching, she told Tuppence, her voice soft but resolute, and they're watching still. The storm raged on, but in Miss Marple's mind, a different kind of storm was gathering, one that would soon break over St. Mary Mead, revealing the truth in its lightning flash. Chapter 7. The Revelation. The storm had spent its fury by evening, leaving St. Mary Mead glistening under a moonlit sheen, the air fresh with the scent of rain-soaked earth. In Miss Jane Marple's drawing-room, the fire crackled with a comforting warmth, casting flickering shadows across her chintz curtains. Her knitting lay abandoned on the side table, for her mind was wholly occupied with the intricate puzzle of Reginald Thorpe's murder. The discovery of the shoes in the churchyard, stuffed with forged provenance documents, had shifted the case like a kaleidoscope, revealing new patterns. Yet the killer's identity remained a shadow, lurking just beyond the light of her deductions. Miss Marple had invited her small circle of suspects back to her cottage, ostensibly to finalize plans for the village fete. but her true purpose was to lay a trap as delicate as the lace doilies beneath her teacups. Inspector Craddock sat by the hearth, his notebook open, his eyes alert. Sir Henry Clithering, his usual bluster muted, nursed a glass of sherry. Dr. Haydock leaned against the mantel, his boyish charm strained by fatigue. Lydia Finch, pale and withdrawn, sat beside Mr. Pettigrew, whose nervous habit of polishing his spectacles had grown more pronounced. Raymond West, sensing a denouement worthy of his novels, hovered near the door, pen poised. Miss Marple poured tea with her usual grace, her voice light as she spoke of bunting and raffle prizes. But her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed nothing. The way Haydock's fingers twitched, Pettigrew's furtive glances, Lydia's tightly clasped hands. "It's curious, isn't it?" she said suddenly, setting down the teapot. "How much trouble a pair of shoes can cause. Poor Mr. Thorpe's were so carefully hidden, yet so carelessly found." Her tone was mild, but the room tensed, as if the air itself held its breath. Craddock, catching her cue, leaned forward. "The microfilm in those shoes changes everything," he said. "Thorpe wasn't just a thief. He was forging documents to pass off stolen antiques as legitimate. Someone knew his game and silenced him for it." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking briefly as she retrieved them. "Indeed, Inspector. And the chloroform on his handkerchief suggests a calculated act, not a due, spur-of-the-moment crime. Someone planned to subdue him, then strangle him, and take those shoes to secure the evidence." She paused, her gaze settling on Haydock. "Dr. Haydock, you prescribed sedatives for Mr. Thorpe's insomnia, but you also had access to chloroform in your surgery, did you not?" Haydock's face strained of colour, his smile faltering. "Preposterous, Miss Marple! Yes, I have chloroform. It's standard for minor procedures. But I'd never—" He stopped, his voice cracking under the weight of her steady gaze. She continued, her tone as gentle as a lullaby. "You treated Thorpe, heard his fears of betrayal, his talk of a bad bargain. He confided in you, perhaps seeking an ally in his forgery scheme. But when he backed out, threatening to expose you, you acted. You followed him to the lane that night, armed with chloroform from your bag. You drugged him, strangled him with a cord, and took the shoes, knowing they held the microfilm." The room was silent, save for the fire's crackle and a distant rumble of retreating thunder. Haydock's hands clenched, his eyes darting to the door. "This is absurd! You've no proof!" Miss Marple's needles paused. "Oh, but there is proof, Doctor. The large boot print in the lane, veering toward the vicarage garden. It matches your size, not Tommy Finch's. And the chalky smear I found. It came from the quarry path, where you often walk to clear your head, as you've told the vicar. You hid the shoes in the churchyard. But Dolly Bantry's scream interrupted you, didn't it? You couldn't risk retrieving them later." Sir Henry coughed, his sherry glass trembling. "Good Lord, Haydock, is this true?" Lydia gasped, her handkerchief pressed to her mouth. Pettigrew's spectacles fell from his hands, clattering to the floor. Miss Marple pressed on, her voice unwavering. "The telegram, shoes know all, was your warning to Thorpe, sent from Much Benham's post office. I checked with the postmistress. She remembers a man matching your description. You wanted him to run, to make him vulnerable, but he didn't run far enough." Haydock's composure cracked, his shoulders slumping. "You're wrong," he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. Craddock, sensing the moment, stood, his hand on his notebook. "Doctor, we'll need to search your surgery. If we find chloroform matching the residue on Thorpe's handkerchief, it's over." Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes soft but relentless. "You see, Doctor, you underestimated St. Mary Mead. Villagers notice everything. The way you lingered at the Blue Boar that night, the mud on your boots the next morning, the cigarette stub with rouge you left in the churchyard. You don't smoke, but your nurse does, and she wears that shade. Perhaps she saw more than you intended." Haydock's face crumpled. A man caught in a net of his own weaving. "It wasn't meant to go this far," he muttered. "Thorpe approached me with his scheme. Forged papers for stolen antiques, a fortune to be made. I thought I could control it, take a cut. But he got greedy, said he'd turn me in unless I paid him. I couldn't let him ruin me." Craddock snapped his notebook shut. "That's enough, Doctor. You're coming with us." As Polk handcuffed Haydock, the room exhaled, the tension breaking like the storm outside. Lydia sobbed quietly, and Sir Henry drained his sherry in one gulp. Pettigrew retrieved his spectacles, his hands shaking. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her needles clicking in rhythm with the ticking clock. "People are so predictable," she said softly to Raymond, who scribbled furiously, like that solicitor in Chipping Cleghorn, who thought his cleverness would outwit a village, but villages, my dear, have long memories. As Haydock was led away, the cottage settled into a quiet hum. Miss Marple poured another cup of tea, her mind already drifting to the fete. The microfilm, the shoes, the telegram, all had played their parts, but it was human nature, with its greed and fear, that had written the script. She recalled a spinster in her youth, undone by a hidden diary, her secrets spilling like ink. "The truth always surfaces," she murmured to Tuppence, who purred in agreement. Outside, the moon broke through the clouds, silvering the wet cobblestones. St. Mary Mead would sleep tonight, its secrets laid bare. But Miss Marple, with her quiet wisdom and unerring eye, knew that new puzzles would rise with the dawn. For now, though, the revelation was complete, and the man with no shoes had found justice in the flicker of her firelight. Chapter 8. The Quiet Aftermath. The storm had passed, leaving St. Mary Mead bathed in the crisp clarity of an October morning. The village awoke to a serene hush, as if the resolution of Reginald Thorpe's murder had stilled its restless pulse. Sunlight filtered through the elms, gilding the wet cobblestones, and the scent of damp grass mingled with the faint sweetness of late roses. In Miss Jane Marple's cottage, the kettle hummed softly on the stove, and the fire in her drawing-room cast a cosy glow across the familiar chintz and lace. Her knitting needles clicked in a gentle rhythm, a counterpoint to the ticking of the mantel clock. As she reflected on the case that had stirred the village like a tempest in a teacup. Dr. Haydock's arrest had sent ripples through St. Mary Mead, each wave carrying whispers of shock and vindication. By midday, the news had spread from the post office to the butcher's, with villagers recounting the doctor's confession in hushed, awed tones. "To think," Mrs. Clement said over tea at the vicarage, "he seemed such a charming man, always so kind at the surgery." But Miss Marple, sipping her Earl Grey, knew charm was often a mask for ambition. She recalled a vicar's son from her girlhood, whose polished manners had hidden a fierce penchant for forgery, undone by a misplaced ledger. Inspector Craddock stopped by her cottage that afternoon, his face weary but relieved. "It's a tidy end, Miss Marple," he said, accepting a slice of Cherry's seed cake. "Haydock's confessed to everything. Thorpe's scheme, the chloroform, the strangulation. He's even admitted to planting that brooch on Tommy Finch to throw us off. We found the chloroform vial in his surgery, hidden in a locked drawer." He shook his head. "If it weren't for you, we'd have pinned it on Tommy and missed the truth." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "You're too kind, Inspector. I merely noticed what was there to see. Villages, you know, are like open books. Every glance, every habit tells a story." She thought of old Mrs. Hargreaves, who had hidden her savings in a biscuit tin, betrayed by a careless crumb. Dr. Haydock was clever, but cleverness often stumbles over its own pride. The village, now free of its shadow, returned to its routines. Lydia Finch, cleared of suspicion, resumed her work at the Blue Boar, her smile brighter for the weight lifted from her shoulders. Sir Henry Clithering, his blackmail secret safe, donated generously to the fete, perhaps to polish his tarnished reputation. Mr. Pettigrew, relieved to be out of the spotlight, polished his bar glasses with renewed vigour, while Mrs. Price Ridley's tale of the woman in the red coat faded into a footnote, dismissed as moonlit fancy. "People do love their stories," Miss Marple mused to her nephew Raymond, who lingered in the village, scribbling notes for a novel he swore would rival Christie herself. Raymond, sprawled in an armchair, grinned. "Aunt Jane, you've outdone yourself. A murder solved with a cigarette stub, a telegram, and a pair of shoes. It's positively literary. But tell me, how did you know it was Haydock? That boot print could have been anyone's." Miss Marple set down her knitting, her hands folding neatly in her lap. "It was the little things, my dear. The chalky smear from the quarry path, where Haydock walked daily. The rouge on the cigarette stub, his nurse's shade, not a mysterious femme fatale's. And his manner so quick to dismiss Thorpe's fears as nerves, yet so guarded himself. I've seen it before, in a village schoolmaster who forged cheques, his guilt betrayed by a tremor in his voice." She smiled faintly. "Human nature is a pattern, Raymond, and patterns repeat." The case of the man with no shoes, as the village dubbed it, became a legend, recounted over tea and pints with the embellishments of time. Some said Thorpe's ghost haunted the lane, his stockinged feet leaving no trace. Others claimed the shoes themselves were cursed, hiding secrets too dark to name. Miss Marple, hearing these tales through Cherry, chuckled softly. "Ghosts and curses," she said to Tuppence, her cat, who blinked from the hearthrug. "How people love to embroider the truth." Yet one detail lingered in her mind. A loose thread she couldn't resist tugging. The telegram, "Shoes know all," had been sent from Much Benham, but Haydock's confession hadn't fully explained its origin. Had he an accomplice? Someone who typed the message to spook Thorpe? She thought of the postmistress's vague description of a man in a hat, too generic to pin down. It was a small matter, perhaps, but Miss Marple disliked untidy ends. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a single overlooked letter had unravelled a second conspiracy. For now, though, she let it rest, content that justice had been served. As evening fell, Miss Marple took a final stroll through the churchyard, her scarf warding off the autumn chill. The yew tree where the shoes had been found stood sentinel, its branches whispering in the breeze. She paused by the stile, where the chalky smear and broken twig had first hinted at Haydock's guilt. The lane was quiet now, its mud smoothed by rain and time, but it held memories of fear and flight. "Poor Mr. Thorpe," she murmured, "so clever, yet so foolish. Secrets are heavy burdens, and shoes are poor hiding places." Back at her cottage, she settled by the fire, Tuppence curling at her feet. The fete was tomorrow, and the village would gather in a flurry of cakes and laughter, the murder already fading into law. Miss Marple picked up her knitting. her needles resuming their dance. The case had been a puzzle, intricate and satisfying, but she knew St. Mary Mead would offer others. Human nature, with its greed, fear, and folly, was an endless well of mysteries. The village clock chimed 9, its toll soft in the still night. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind drifting to a long-ago spinster who had hidden a stolen ring in her glove, undone by a single dropped stitch. Secrets always slip out, she told Tuppence, her voice a whisper. It's only a matter of watching and waiting. Outside, the moon silvered the village, and St. Mary Mead slept, its secrets laid bare, for now. But Miss Marple, with her quiet wisdom and unerring eye, remained ever vigilant, ready for the next thread to pull, the next truth to unravel in the gentle heart of her village.